Where are these terrorist sleeper cells coming from and why? As we walk up to the map, take a look at that urgent warning from the 9/11 Commission 11 years ago. The U.S. government must use all elements of national power to destroy actual or potential terrorist sanctuaries. But have we heeded that warning? Terrorists are still finding safe haven in so many danger zones. And few know those hotspots better than the men we have here this morning. We start with Yemen, home to Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the group behind those Paris attacks. Admiral Robert Harward is a former deputy commander of CENTCOM, which oversees Yemen, and is a former Navy SEAL. Admiral Harward, how big a problem is AQAP still in Yemen?
They're still able to plan and execute missions outside of the country. That's a big problem.
How much of Yemen is really ungoverned, is really a problem? It almost seems like half of it to me.
Well, the large majority of the country is, Martha, and that's part of the problem. How do we get out to those regions where no one controls the area and get after these guys? That's tough in any book, but in this area, you have a safe haven in all of those areas, and these vast areas provide a place for them to hide, especially when they're smart enough not to use communications to allow us to find them.
Thanks, Admiral Harward. Now from Yemen to Syria. It's civil war creating a lawless zone, attracting thousands of Western recruits to ISIS. By some estimates, as many foreign fighters as were training in Afghanistan before 9/11. Just last week, the girlfriend of one of the suspects in the Paris terror attacks headed for Syria, believing it would provide her sanctuary from the law. For that part of the story, we're joined by James Cartwright, retired Marine Corps general, former vice chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. General Cartwright, has this girlfriend just disappeared forever?
Well, probably not forever, but it's going to be very difficult to locate her. We don't have a great presence on the ground. We don't have a great understanding of the movement of individuals through this battle space. And so trying to track her down with just aerial reconnaissance is going to be a very difficult task.
And ISIS just seems to be spreading in Syria.
They are. Their stated objective is to control space from the northwest corner of Syria down across the border into Iraq to Baghdad and then on to the border with Iran. And they have occupied a great amount of this space. They followed the rivers, the natural resources. Most of the work that's being done by the Americans and the Allies in the air campaign is focusing on those border crossings, the dam up by Mosul, and then up by Aleppo, trying to cut the supply lines off and the ability to command and control those forces.
And one thing we have learned is that the U.S. will soon start training those so-called moderate Syrian rebels to send them back into Syria, but that takes so long.
It's a long process, it's a difficult process, it's an uncertain process. But the hope is that if we can train some of these people, they will provide us the eyes and ears that we so desperately need on the ground to understand what's actually going on and where to target when necessary.
Our thanks to General Cartwright. Now to Nigeria, where that jihadist insurgency Boko Haram sparked global outrage when it kidnapped hundreds of schoolgirls last April. Now this week, reports the group used a 10-year-old girl as a suicide bomber, part of a new wave of killing. Let's bring in Carter Ham, retired Army general and former commander of U.S. Africa Command. General Ham, we also watched those extraordinary satellite images, the before pictures of a village there and after, completely wiped out by Boko Haram. It only seems to be getting worse there as well.
I think that's right, Martha. Sadly, Boko Haram has become more violent and has extended their reach over the past few years.
And we also saw overnight in Niger, there were 10 killed in protests against France, against the magazine in France in those images of the Prophet Muhammad. It does seem to be spilling across the borders. But what about to the west?
The danger of Boko Haram in Nigeria, first and foremost, is that they have killed thousands upon thousands of innocents so far and displaced more than 1 million, perhaps 1.5 million, both internally in Nigeria and across Nigeria's borders. So there is a real threat regionally, and the great danger to the west is that that power base that Boko Haram is seeking to establish in northern Nigeria could give them a platform from which they could extend their attacks into Europe and perhaps even to the United States.
And that problem we're talking about of safe havens, correct?
Absolutely. To date, the Nigerian government has had only limited success in thwarting Boko Haram's efforts.
Thanks, General Ham. And now to the terrorists who can wreak havoc from anywhere, anytime. This week, President Obama and British Prime Minister David Cameron announcing new measures on cybersecurity after the massive North Korean hack of Sony put cyber warfare back in the spotlight. Joining us now, retired General Keith Alexander, former head of the NSA and U.S. Cyber Command. General Alexander, first of all, we did see a hack into Central Command, ISIS flags flying on the Twitter account, on Facebook accounts. How does this happen, and is that serious?
Well, thanks, Martha. First, we've seen the number of attacks across commercial sector and government sectors increase over the past few years, and they're becoming more destructive.
And this is clearly a problem we're just not ready for.
Well, it's a problem we're not ready for. The Sony attack clearly highlights that we're not ready for that. Here is a destructive attack by a nation state, and it shows we're not ready, and it shows the way we're protecting our networks is not working.
Does this still keep you up at night, even though you're out now?
It sure does. But I think there's a solution, and I think we've got to do that. It begins with what the president says on cyber legislation, and it begins with what the president and the British Prime Minister said. We've got to work with our allies.
And it is clearly an urgent problem. Thanks, General Alexander. So with all these threats around the world, the big question, how vulnerable are we here at home?